So exactly what is it that the Namibian government is proposing as changes to policy for their minerals and mining environment?
In a nutshell, all new discoveries, the Namibian government would have the first right to, exclusive rights, in fact, in terms of mining and exploration. So that is the main change.
So what happens to those who are already operating in Namibia and have existing licenses, those who've applied for licenses before this policy shift was proposed?
A lot of foreign companies that have been operating in the country were concerned when this came out, so they sought clarity on it. And from what we can gather, existing licenses will not be affected. Just going forward, in terms of new discoveries, those would be state-owned, but as it stands, existing licenses in terms of mining or exploration will not be affected.
Tell us more about the state mining company and how it gets first priority in terms of exploration rights, and whether it has the capacity, the commercial viability to really pursue some of these projects, because we know that exploration is a capital-intensive business.
I think the most important thing to note is that this is not a nationalization. So one of the clauses is that the state can engage in joint ventures with interested parties for other exploration and mining. So there could very well be other foreign companies still involved if their relations with government are good enough, or if government actually sees it as being a viable option.
All right, in that context then, the government has identified what it calls strategic minerals, where it wants to see greater exploration activities and local equity, and this is the mining of uranium, copper, gold and rare earths. So far the focus has been on diamonds, so how viable are some of these projects? How lucrative is the new mineral regime?
Okay, yes, diamonds for the new policy will not be affected. Namibia, one of the largest producers of diamonds in the world, they won't be affected by this, so it's important to note that. Viability going forward, I think uranium is their next big thing, fourth largest producer in the world of yellow cake, which is very promising for the country. Uranium prices, our forecasts are pretty promising going forward as well. So I think their new strategic minerals, mining is the backbone of the Namibian economy, so it is very promising going forward.
When I was just reading through who some of the existing participants in the sector are, it's largely Australian companies, a few Canadian. What are they doing to try to really promote the mining opportunities beyond these traditional mining countries with big mining investors?
Well, I think the Australian companies were the ones that were most concerned about the new policy at the moment. They did come out to say during the week that they are actually not that concerned anymore. They have spoken to members of the government, and they're not really concerned because they have very good relationships with the government in place. Mm-hmm. In terms of promoting other country investments into Namibia, I think the economy is very open for that at this stage. They do know that mining is their one selling point, their biggest selling point, and they would be very willing to allow more FDI in that regard.
What's envisaged in terms of local participation and equity versus foreign participation? Because Namibia is not so far away from South Africa, and we know that in South Africa we're grappling with this issue of improving on equity quotas, that any investment has to reflect a certain percentage of local ownership.
Well, the government hasn't detailed that as yet. This is still in a very proposal sort of stage. It will go through and perhaps be passed as legislation later on in the year. The government is pressing for that. But I do imagine that there would be certain equity quotas that would be in place, but nothing has been specified at this stage.
All right, let's talk about the general investment environment. What's it like in Namibia?
Well, Rand Merchant Bank view is very promising growth for the country going forward. Obviously, with the mining sector boosting that. We do see GDP going to about 4% this year and growing nicely afterwards as uranium picks up, as the Japanese economy starts to rebuild itself, and you'll see demand for uranium picking up there. Obviously, they do have certain infrastructure problems in terms of water, electricity, their roads, but that's not something that's exclusive to Namibia in the African continent.
Obviously, the economy is hinged very strongly on a mining economy, but we also know that right now we're in a resources boom, or relatively speaking, give or take the last few days, and should that continue, then they should be in good stead. But if we ever see the volatility we saw 2.5 years ago, then they're in big trouble. Particularly diamonds, for instance, should have taught them a huge lesson about that kind of volatility. Is there any attempt to diversify the economy?
I do think that one of their biggest downfalls is their narrow economic base. The other things that they do have is fishing and agriculture and the likes of that, but nothing as big as mining. So their narrow economic base is a concern.
And what about fiscal management of the economy? We know that they've run a huge deficit and government's intending to borrow to the tune of about 10 billion Namibian dollars in terms of trying to finance that deficit. Is that a worry?
Well, that 10.1 billion Namibian dollars is for this current financial year. The government is looking to source 2/3 of that from abroad and 1/3 of it locally. In our opinion, they could probably absorb it because of the high savings level that they've accumulated over the years, which stood at about 29% of GDP last year. And as well, the government is looking to bring in new things to further improve that savings level, such as their retail bonds and inflation-linked bonds.